Are you ready to get into your big spooky tale?
For
I
sure.
don't know how
And
long
then,
it will take you to read. It took me a decent time, but I feel like I do usually read pretty slowly.
very fair. And then afterwards, what did you have planned?
Nothing.
Well, if you'd like, I picked out a few of my favorite poems, so we
Ooh,
could take
ooh,
turns, give them a read.
that'd be great.
Sounds good. All right. All right. This tale of Oliver and his rather interesting birthday.
I guess first before we get into this, I should ask chat, is the volume okay for everything? Cuz this is going to be a longer story, so I want to make sure the campfire is not too loud. Demon Dad can be heard. And Demon Dad, are there any trigger
Mhm.
warnings for this? Cuz I totally forgot that with my first story.
Oh yes. There would be some like nothing really explicit. No kids get hit, but is implied that you know some child abuse is there,
Mhm.
neglect, but and ultimately at the end there is some body horror and death.
Karma, maybe.
Yeah, some karma. Anyway,
All right.
and with
Good to
that we
go.
shall begin. Oliver walked back and forth in front of the door of his room, one hand clutching a sheet of paper while the other held a small collection of coins. The 12-year-old's body was tense, his breathing quick, and he only relaxed after one of his toys caught his gaze. The brief distraction allowed him to focus on something else, and he walked over to the small action figure. I can't do it, Oliver whispered. The aged visage of Spider-Man sat silently on his mostly empty shelf, his face so worn by time that most of it had lost its color. It's now blank white. But what about Mom? She told me we don't have any money. Oliver mumbled, his grip tightening. Spider-Man said nothing, his empty gaze staring straight ahead as his arms remained raised, ready to web swing away at a moment's notice. You're right. That's why I got the money, Oliver murmured, clutching the coins a little tighter. I think I might be able to do it. The toy stood motionless. Thanks, Spider-Man, Oliver exclaimed, before turning back to the door. With bold, confident steps, the child strode over to the exit, to his sparsely furnished room, and gripped the handle. With a twist, it opened, and the boy started to walk down the hallway that led from his space past the kitchen and into the living room. It wasn't actually that long of a walk, but to Oliver it felt like it took more time than it would be to go to school. The floor occasionally groaned beneath his feet, the aged trailer seemingly barely able to hold up even his minuscule weight. As he walked, Oliver caught a glimpse of the trailer park from a passing window, though he didn't look for long. It was a depressing sight, though that could also be used to describe their home as well. The fake wood paneling that adorned the walls had faded so badly, in some sections, that it was now almost completely white. The ceiling. Give me one second here. I accidentally scrolled down.
Very
Occasionally
nice.
sagged, and the smell of rodents and mildew was constant. But that wasn't the worst of it. The most unpleasant aspect of the home was the living room, or more specifically, the sole occupant therein. The 30-year-old woman sat in front of the newest object in the house, a shiny black laptop that Oliver had never been allowed to touch. The PC's user sat straight up in her office chair, her long, thin fingers tapping rapidly at the well-maintained keyboard. She would occasionally stop to roll up the long red sleeves of her coat or smooth any creases that may have formed in her nearly ankle-length white dress. Throughout it all, her small, beady brown eyes never strayed from the screen or the words therein. Even her narrow shoulders were bent forward in concentration, and a line of small, almost imperceptible wrinkles pierced her makeup, which was monumental achievement, as despite having been home almost all day, the woman was dressed as though she was still at the office and was gunning for a promotion. This professional, no-nonsense appearance clashed with her remarkable beauty and thin, waspish physique, though at one point she may have had the curves of a supermodel and the face to match. A change in lifestyle had added a few pounds to all the wrong places. Her cheeks bulged ever so slightly, and her upper arms carried more fat than she would have liked, which was why they were always hidden. Oliver gulped and took another step forward. Hello, Mom, he greeted. The typing stopped, and the woman turned towards the boy, her wrinkles fading rapidly as her smile crossed her face. Oh, hello there, Oliver. What are you doing out of your room? Are you hungry? She asked. Oliver shook his head. No, I wanted to give you this. He stuck out his hand, all but shoving the piece of paper into his mother's crisp. Oh, sure, she muttered, uncurling the sheet of loose leaf. This is very nice. Is that me? Oliver nodded and pointed to the woman in the drawing. That's you, and that's all your money, he explained. That certainly is quite the mountain of gold I have, she murmured, though I notice that both you and your father aren't around. Oh, I didn't know how to draw us, Oliver remarked, shoulders slumping. Sorry. No, that's quite all right. It's fitting, in a way, she muttered to herself before placing the paper aside. Now then, what is it you want? Nothing, he stuttered. I just wanted to give you that. Sure you did. You're just like your father. You only ever do nice things when you want something in return, muttered the young woman, arms crossed over her chest. Oliver gulped. I wanted to ask you if it was okay if I had a birthday party and invited my friends from school. You have friends? She asked, incredulously. John and Jacob Simmons, Oliver whispered. You mean those two poor children from down the street? The woman shrugged. Regardless, the answer is no. Why not? Oliver asked. You really have to ask? She scoffed, rising from her chair. How would we feed these friends of yours when we can barely feed ourselves? Don't worry, I got that covered, Oliver declared, raising his other hand up and opening it wide. What is... A confused expression crossed the woman's face. How much is that? $10.93. I got it all from picking up empties around the park. Enough for a medium pizza and a big bottle of Mr. Pibb, Oliver proudly explained. The woman swiped the handful of change and deposited it into a pocket, before sitting back down in her chair with a dull thump. Oliver's victorious expression melted away the second he saw the flat, disapproving stare that his mother wore, almost as often as she wore her faded red blazer. You know your father would never agree to this, she declared. It would be short, only 2 hours. You wouldn't even have to leave my room, except to eat pizza, Oliver pressed. Your father needs all the quiet time he can get, you know. He can't rebuild a directing career without ample space and time, she explained. We could just play outside the whole time, Oliver bargained, shifting from foot to foot. We could even just go to the park down the street. You'd need someone to look after you, and I can't stop running PR for your father for more than an hour before the work begins to pack up, she continued, a scowl crossing her face. Not after that last harlot came out anyway. Damn her gold-digging ass. That's fine. I can just go to their house and give the money to their mom, Oliver replied. The woman sat quietly, staring impassively over Oliver's head. I don't know. We'll have to see what your father thinks of the entire thing. He was supposed to be home by now, she remarked. Oliver's eyes went wide. No, that's okay. You don't have to do that. In fact, keep the money. No, you wanted a party so bad you thought to bribe me, and now you have to follow through, she retorted. Oliver looked around, his gaze immediately lashing onto the large window at the front of the trailer home. In it, he saw the street that ran in front of their house, its dust and gravel untouched by the wheels of passing cars. The boy ran over and pressed his face against the glass, looking as far to the left as possible, where a large black car with tinted windows drove slowly down the street, its wheels crunching nearly silently. The sight made Oliver's throat tighten, and his arms instinctively wrap around his sides. The boy could feel his breathing begin to quicken, and for a single panic-filled moment, he considered simply running as fast as he could. Then a hand settled on his shoulder. Go wait by the door. I don't want you barricading your room again, whispered his mother in a flat, monotone voice. Oliver could only nod obediently before walking robotically to the entrance of their home, gaze downcast. There he stood as the heavy, expensive car rolled into their driveway, its door opening briefly before shutting a moment later. The soft footfalls of his father echoed through the entire house like a rhythmic gong in some macabre funeral march. When finally the door opened, Oliver half expected Death himself to enter the home, yet the person that appeared shared only a passing resemblance with the Reaper. They both wore black, though his father had a tie and an expertly tailored suit rather than a tattered cloak. For a moment, Oliver wished that it had been Death that was standing there, but he quickly dismissed that notion. What's this? Asked the man, in a low tone, glancing expectantly at his wife. Oliver was hoping to ask you something, she replied, her voice rising slightly higher than usual. It can wait until after I've changed shoes, he muttered. Oliver remained silent through it all, merely watching as his large elderly father shucked off his shoes in order to don his battered loafers. Each movement the aged man made was slow and deliberate, his face contorting in pain every other second. Throughout it all, the male's jaw remained tight, keeping his several dangling chins from moving very far while he struggled to change. Once done, he sighed and looked down at his son with a flat, neutral expression. What did you want? Oliver gulped. I want to celebrate my birthday, he asked, stated. The man stared down at his son for several seconds before setting his briefcase on the floor. Come on, follow me, he declared. No, wait, I don't want to anymore. I take it back, Oliver pleaded. Don't make this any worse on yourself, replied the man, pointing to the room at the end of the hall. Now march. Aye, Oliver gulped. Yes, father. The child trudged slowly down the hallway, his shoulders folded inwards, and his head hung low. You should learn to appreciate the things we have left. Your toys, a room, us. Those liars I used to work with tried to take that all away from you, exclaimed the man in a low, almost kind tone. One day we'll be able to move back to the house on the hill, maybe even hire back that nanny you like so much. But until then, you have to stay out of the way. Oliver nodded, but dared not speak a word. Together they walked into the small bedroom, with Oliver's father closing the door firmly behind them. The child walked dutifully over to the window, while his parent put his phone down on a table and clicked play. Some old rock song from the 80s spilled in the tiny speaker, filling the room with a whine of electric guitar. This is for your own good, son. Every time you distract me or your mother, it adds another week to the time before we get your house back. Oliver nodded dutifully, biting back the urge to tell his father that he cared nothing for the house, the toys, or all the things he used to have. Now, since you have to put up a fuss, I'm only going to give you 5, but if you bring this up again, I'll double it. Got it? Asked the man. He sat down at the small desk, nearly crushing the child-sized chair under his weight. Oliver nodded once. Good. Now lay your head down here, father ordered, patting his lap. The child did as he was told, and braced himself for impact. Remember, this hurts me far more than it hurts you. Do better next time, and this won't have to happen, stated the man. Oliver didn't believe him. Not one bit. Oliver stood with his arms resting on the narrow lip of the window, his gaze lingering on the small backyard out and beyond. It had been some time since that meeting, and he was starting to feel a little bit better. And he looked back. The diminutive fenced area was empty, save for the numerous weeds and collection of bushes growing off to one side. The only bright spot was a red ball Oliver had left next to the gate, though it was only partially visible due to the low light. The day was over, and the moon had begun to rise, shrouding the world in darkness save for his small room. Only the lamp atop his desk offered any resistance against the encroaching gloom, its slim illumination barely allowing him to peer into the backyard. The child grimaced as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, pain still lancing up his backside. He tried his best to pretend like the unpleasant sensations weren't happening, and focus merely on the tiny yard just beyond the window. He also did his best to ignore the sounds of music playing from the other room and the constant babble of someone speaking into a phone. I wish someone would throw me a party, he muttered to himself. If only I had a bigger house or more money. Oliver stood there with his face pressed against the glass for what felt like hours, imagining the celebration he wished he was participating in. Then a curious flash of color caught his eye, and he looked over to find a splotch of something vibrant at the edge of the small yard. Focusing on that spot, Oliver was startled to see what looked like an old-timey clown, half shrouded in greenery, and looking directly at him. What the heck is that? Oliver murmured to himself. His gaze narrowed, and he peered intently at the bizarre person, who was tall, so tall, in fact, that it could peer into the trailer home and meet Oliver's eye level even while the boy was standing. Not only that, but it was frightfully colored, and wore what looked like a cheap paper mask over its face. The many different colored polka dots covered its clowny jumper almost completely, leaving a few spots left of white. Her mask had 2 upside-down U's for eyes, 2 dashes for eyebrows, and a single triangular mouth. There was no obvious openings or methods for the clown to see Oliver, yet the boy knew it was looking at him. While it silently appraised the boy, the clown's body remained stiff, and its poofy, cotton candy-like hair defied physics by standing straight up. Oliver gulped and began to step away from the window, his gaze never leaving the strange woman. He didn't make it far before stepping on a pencil and nearly falling, but he caught himself on the edge of the desk. Immediately, he scrambled back into a stand, half expecting the clown to be right there on the other side of the window. It wasn't there, though. In fact, it was completely gone, seemingly without a trace. What? Where did it? Oliver trailed off, his gaze latching onto a single solitary balloon tied to a branch near where the clown had been standing a moment earlier. The teal decoration bobbed up and down, the cartoonish pink eye painted on it facing Oliver constantly. The sight was a strange one, though compared to the weirdly proportioned and brightly colored clown, it was downright normal. I'm probably just hungry, Oliver reasoned to himself, only to wince. I shouldn't bother Mom or Dad, though. I wouldn't want to distract them while they're working. I'm sure they'll bring me supper before bed. With a sigh, the boy walked over to his desk and flipped open his math textbook. He considered sitting down and staying there, but the mere thought of doing any kind of homework or sitting down for a long period of time made a twinge of pain shoot up his back. What do I do now? Oliver muttered, only for another strange realization to strike him. This time it wasn't some bizarre stalker clown, but rather the quiet which had fallen over the trailer, which grabbed his attention. It was never quiet after his father got home. There was always music, or the sound of someone talking into a phone, if not both at the same time. The walls were so thin that any conversation was heard throughout the home, and even the smallest movements were audible at a great distance. Yet there was nothing, until a chipper, sing-songy female voice suddenly rang throughout the house, accompanied by what sounded like an entire live band. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Oliver. Happy birthday to you, sang the voice. Oliver's jaw hung open, and he sprinted over to the door, only to stop a second before turning the handle. As he was left reeling from the memory of his father's warning to not leave his room, Oliver noticed something odd slip under the door. Looking down, the boy saw what looked like a card, one addressed to him in bright, bold pink letters. To Oliver, from your friend, Oliver murmured, picking up the slip of paper and flipping it open. You are invited to a party celebrating your birthday. Where? In your living room. When? Right now. So come on down and join the party. Oliver stood there in confusion, his mind desperately grappling with the bizarre circumstance that had befallen him. First the weird stalker clown, now an invitation to a party. Surely this was all some kind of weird joke, right? Curious, Oliver turned the invitation over to find that it was indeed handmade, that there was one final message for him. P.S. Your friends are all coming, so don't keep them waiting, Oliver murmured. This has to be a test or something. The boy bit his lip, glancing from his bed to the doorknob and back again before yanking it open and bracing himself for more strangeness. Though definitely odd, the hallway beyond wasn't that abnormal, at least not in the grand scheme of things. It was still different, though, as streamers, balloons, and other decorations covered the walls and dangled down from the ceiling. Whoa, Oliver murmured to himself. Walking down the hall on a gaze, Oliver felt as though he'd entered a dream, and briefly wondered if he had fallen asleep. Awake or not, the boy was determined to continue on, and find out what was going on. His rapid footsteps faltered somewhat when he passed his parents' closed door, or the door to his parents' room, I should say, his nose detecting an unpleasant aroma of rotten eggs. Now recoiling in disgust, Oliver pinched his nostrils shut before grabbing the door handle and giving it a turn. Nothing happened, and Oliver determined that it was locked, leaving the boy a little confused, though not overly surprised. As he stood there, the smell triggered an instinctual fear in the boy that left him anxious and unsure of himself. That anxiety didn't last long, as was wafted away by a new scent, one that was familiar as it was sweet. Oliver continued down the hall, sniffing the air, trying to figure out what exactly he had smelled. The question was answered the second he entered the kitchen area, and was greeted with a whole host of snacks. Chips, cookies, candy, and more were all piled high in brightly colored bowls and lined up next to half a dozen different bottles of unopened pop. The sight was enough to make Oliver's stomach rumble, and he nearly launched himself at the table like a ravenous animal. Again he was stopped by something abnormal. This time it was a sound. The sound of laughter. Familiar laughter at that. Is that? Oliver murmured, spinning towards the living room. The boy all but sprinted around the cabinets and into the living space, where he saw a group of people playing Monopoly on a coffee table. They weren't just anyone, though, as Oliver knew each one by name and recognized their faces. There was John and Jacob, the two Latino kids he had met at his new school, but there was also Mallory, the nanny that used to take care of him. Nearly everything about her was just as he remembered, including her hair, which was the same semi-tangled mass of curls that hung down to her shoulders. Everything about her was bright, from her dark skin to her gold hoop earrings and her sparkling white teeth. She even wore the same dark gray hoodie and faded blue jeans, as she had on the last day that they had ever spent together. "Oh, hello, Ollie," she greeted, flashing the boy a wide smile. "You never told me you had such funny friends before, and you never told us you had such a hot girlfriend," teased John with his wide, toothy smile. "Ha, he wishes," Jacob remarked, the two brothers sharing a laugh. "How are you here?" Oliver muttered. "You invited us, remember?" John replied. "Yeah, you sent us those fancy letters with that girly pink writing on them," Jacob added. "Don't tease him. I thought the letters were great, and signing them as your friend was a nice, mysterious touch," Mallory the nanny remarked. "But I didn't do that," Oliver murmured. "Must have been your mom, then," John replied with a shrug. "Either way, who cares?" "Yeah, this party's great. How'd you let your parents throw it?" Or, how didn't you? Jacob inquired. "I didn't," Oliver glumly answered. "Hey now," Mallory began, rising from her spot on the couch and touching Oliver on the shoulder. "Let's not sweat the small stuff, eh? Why don't we go get some snacks and play something else?" Oh, thank goodness, John was about to win again, Jacob, the slightly overweight young boy, hopping up from the ratty love seat. "Whatever, I'll beat you at any game we play," John retorted. Oliver wanted to stop them, to tell them about the odd smell he detected on the way here, or about the weird clown he saw earlier. Yet he couldn't bring himself to. The words refused to reach his lips, and he stood there in silence, struggling to utter a sound. Try as he might, the boy simply couldn't bring himself to speak of the strangeness of it all, for fear that the illusion may shatter the moment he did. A dream, or some cruel joke, it didn't matter. Oliver was going to enjoy this. "You right there, man?" asked Jacob, waving a hand in front of the other child's face. "You kinda spaced out there for a sec." "Yeah, it's nothing," Oliver quickly replied. "I was thinking about what game I wanted to play." "Makes sense. You certainly got a lot of them," John remarked. Oliver blinked and glanced over to where a small mountain of brand new games had been piled behind the couch. Not only did they run the gamut of board games, but Oliver could also see that several consoles were amidst the pile. Each one of them had its own suite of brand new titles to enjoy, as well as dozens of different movies. It was like Christmas, only somehow even better than the ones he'd had with his family, even when they lived in their mansion. The boy walked over to the snack table in a daze, merely following the dark-skinned woman as she filled a colorful plate with food. "Don't tell me you still need me to get it for you," Mallory teased. Oliver shook his head and glanced up to where the ex-nanny was looking down at him with an amused expression. "Oh, no, sorry," Oliver murmured. "Try to cheer up. It is your birthday party, after all," Mallory exclaimed. "You had better... Oh, yeah, you better hurry. John looks like he's going to eat all the cookies," Jacob remarked, earning him a punch in the shoulder from his brother. "I am not." Oliver chuckled as he piled his plate high with snacks before grabbing a cup of pop and returning to the couch. There he sat in silence, and though he was still grappling with the strangeness of it all, Oliver was beginning to relax. Soon his worries and cares were all but forgotten, leaving him with a wide smile as well as a mouthful of the tastiest treats he had ever eaten. No one else seemed concerned by the oddness of everything, and merely enjoyed the party like nothing odd had ever even happened. Once the snacks had been consumed, they launched into a rousing game of Risk at the birthday boy's request. This was, despite both John and Jacob complaining that the game was boring and took too long. In the end, they were only half right, as Oliver seemed to roll exactly what he needed, when he needed, resulting in a short game where the young boy took over nearly every country within a short amount of time. Pardon me. With Risk now done, the small group were poring over the options before them when the oven beeped loudly before popping open all on its own. "What was that?" Mallory murmured, the woman rising from her seat. "Wait, I got it," Oliver interrupted, the boy leaping from his spot and grabbing his former nanny by the arm. Mallory stopped and knelt down in front of the child. "What is it, Ollie? Is something wrong?" "I just wanted to check first, just in case," Oliver murmured, avoiding the female's perceptive gaze. "Well, all right, you let me know if I need a hand," Mallory replied. Oliver nodded hastily before dashing around the counter, fully expecting to see his mother or father standing there with a disappointed expression on their face, only to be a little confused when he found the kitchen empty, save for the powerful aroma of pizza. A glance in the oven revealed 3 delicious-looking pies waiting for him, each one of his favorites. "All right, you can come in, I guess," Oliver muttered. Mallory peeked around the corner, a wide smile immediately springing to her face. "Well, I'll be, Ollie. I didn't know you could cook," she exclaimed. "They were frozen." Oliver replied, flashing his former nanny a wide smile. "Those are the best-looking frozen pies I've ever seen," muttered Jacob, who had followed his brother into the kitchen. "Stand back, you three. I'll take care of this while you find some plates," Mallory declared. Oliver did as he was asked, lining up with his friends next to the counter, the two other boys taking position behind him. In no time at all, they had acquired several slices of food and were sitting down in the living room once more. A movie was put on, and the small party began to consume their meal. No one noticed that a brand new television had appeared in the living room while they had been distracted. Time passed, more games were played, presents were opened, and laughs were had. Hours went by, yet the moon remained fixed in the same exact spot, its presence unnoticed by any of the partygoers. Finally, after everything began to slow down, and all four of them reclined in their seats, sharing a wide collective smile. "This is great and all, but I feel like it's missing something," John remarked. "Yeah, but what?" Jacob added. Mallory smiled and turned to Oliver expectingly. "I think I know what it is, and I'll give you a hint. What is something sweet that every birthday party has?" "A cake?" Oliver replied. "Exactly," declared the woman. As if on cue, the door to the trailer opened, and an enormous birthday cake topped with a dozen candles emerged, covered with multi-colored icing and styled to look like a pair of skyscrapers. The dessert had a tiny Spider-Man swinging between the apartment buildings. It was then that Oliver realized that not only was it the most elaborate cake Oliver had ever seen, but it was also the largest he had ever laid eyes on. His attention quickly shifted to the person, no, clown, that carried it, however, distracting him before he could observe the many hidden details of the cake. Standing tall enough for her poofy hair to reach the ceiling, the woman wore the same strange party mask that she had the last time Oliver had seen her. A glance towards his friends told the boy that they were unbothered by the entity's presence, as they were still smiling expectantly. Oliver sat patiently, as an upbeat version of Happy Birthday played throughout the room, ending when the cake was deposited on the coffee table, a feat Oliver would have only assumed was impossible given that its gloves were so poofy as to make gripping anything nearly impossible. The second the cake was delivered, the clown clapped their hands excitedly, an action the rest of the group quickly mimicked. "Oh man, this is so cool," John gushed. "I know you said your parents were loaded, but this is crazy." They used to be," Oliver murmured, glancing from the now quiet clown to Mallory, who smiled. "Well, are you going to make a wish or what?" "Oh, yeah, totally," Oliver muttered, turning towards the cake and closing his eyes. Thought to himself, "Even though this is really weird, I wish this night would never end." With that thought firmly in mind, the boy opened his eyes and blew out the candles. Bob trundled leerily up to the front door of the decrepit trailer, his gaze lingering on the expensive-looking car sitting in the dark driveway. For a moment he considered reaching out and just touching it, only for a dull throb of bass to cause his hands to spring to the sides of his head. Keeping out the powerful electronic music assaulting his senses was a difficult challenge, especially this close to its source, but Bob tried anyway. Grumbling curses he couldn't actually hear, Bob awkwardly thumped his elbow against the door to the trailer while keeping his hands firmly over his ears. Noticing that it barely made a sound, Bob wound up and gave it a firm kick in an effort to alert the owners of his presence. In a way, that happened as the door slowly opened and allowed Bob to see within the confines of the home. "Hello?" he shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth, only to immediately wince and place them back over his ears once more. There was little doubt in the man's mind that no one had heard him, and worse still, the music continued unabated. Bob glanced at his own trailer and caught a glimpse of his expectant wife and son staring out the window at him. Nancy then pointed to the trailer Bob was standing in front of, and a disappointed look on her face. "Fuck it," Bob muttered to himself. Stomping into the entrance, Bob looked around to find that he was alone, and had apparently interrupted a late-night birthday party. Streamers hung from the ceiling, balloons hid in the corner of the room, and numerous goodies covered the kitchen table. The man briefly considered shouting again, before giving up and beginning his search for the source of the music, which ultimately led him to the living room and the game console displaying the music it was playing over the speakers. Bob didn't even bother glancing at the screen before flipping it off and mercifully stopping the noise. "Oh, I couldn't even hear myself think," Bob muttered, looking about the room. It was empty, like the rest of the house, though there were signs that someone had been there and recently. A cup, half full with now flat beverage, rested next to a pink plastic plate, absolutely filled with pizza crusts. A game of Monopoly sat half completed at the center of the coffee table, right next to a mostly eaten cake. The elderly and overweight man shrugged his shoulders and turned back in the other direction. "Hello? Is anyone there?" he yelled. "I just wanted to talk to you about the music. Oh, and sorry for barging in, I guess. The front door was open." When no response came, the man waddled towards the entrance, and after briefly considered leaving, decided to continue on. "I'm gonna check to see if everything's alright. Okay?" he shouted. Without the music, it was deadly quiet, and Bob was certain he could hear a pin drop, yet still no one responded to his call. "Hopefully they don't sue the shit out of me for this," Bob muttered to himself before walking deeper into the home. The first door led to the bathroom, which was predictably empty. Glancing further down the hallway revealed that the smaller of the two bedrooms was visible, unlike the other. "Hey, Oliver, is it, right? Are you in there?" Bob asked, feeling quite out of place. Tentatively, the 40-something plumber peeked into the boy's room and found that it was empty. Not just empty, but all signs of anyone having ever lived there had been erased. There were no personal effects, no toys, and the bed didn't even have sheets on it. "Huh, they must have given him up or something," Bob remarked aloud before turning around. He passed by the only closed door he had encountered so far, and was stopped dead in his tracks by an unpleasant aroma, one that he recognized from a job he had taken inside a home where someone had recently died. Rotten eggs, rust, and an oddly sweet tang made the man's pulse quicken. "Are you all right in there?" he shouted, gripping the door handle tightly. "I'm going to force my way inside now." After counting down from 3, Bob backed up and tried to recall his time as a volunteer firefighter. "Come on, Bob, you can do this," muttered the man. After one last deep breath to stifle his nerves, Bob raised his foot and booted the door as hard as he could. The cheap wood shattered, setting the door and more than a few splinters flying. The instant this happened, Bob was assaulted by a tidal wave of rot that nearly knocked him clean from his feet. His eyes watered, his nose scrunched up, and the male was forced to lift his ratty white shirt halfway up his face. This seemed to help, as he clasped the fabric over his features, his vision cleared enough to see something alien that was waiting for him. That for a moment, so alien, in fact, for a moment, the man couldn't even comprehend what he was looking at. The closest comparison was a balloon dog, the kind which he had received during his 7th birthday party, only far larger. Standing as tall as Bob, the mass was definitely not made from cheap plastic and hot air, but rather what appeared to be human flesh. Oh God," Bob muttered, falling back into the hallway, his eyes going wide. Without uttering a word, the man turned and sprinted away, leaving the horrifying object far behind him. Though he had left it in the dust, that didn't mean the memory of it would ever leave him. For even as he ran, Bob couldn't help but think back to the bizarre sight. Limbs had been twisted, contorted, and shattered before being bent and intertwined with one another. Bones had been seen visibly pushing against the inside of the flesh, having torn through whatever muscle was present. Yet despite the monumental violence necessary for such a task, there was no visible blood, no scratches, no scars. Someone or something had masterfully twisted the two human beings together, winding their bodies into a twisted amalgam. Their arms made up the dog's front paws, while its back legs were constructed from what had likely been the couple's legs. Its tail stood straight up, 5 toes sticking into the air, creating a nub of the end of the grotesque creation. The final part, its head, was perhaps the most horrifying piece of all. The flesh of the couple's face had been contorted through unknown means. Whatever being had done this to his neighbors was evidently not from this world, as it had somehow molded the flesh of the two humans. Like clay beneath a potter's touch, their features had been warped and intertwined until their heads nearly merged seamlessly together. That wasn't all, though. Their ears had been stretched to the point that they were 5 times their normal size, and their noses were lengthened to resemble the snout of a dog. The experience had evidently killed them, and yet the pair wore a conjoined smile on their face. Even in death, their eyes remained wide open, their toothy maw revealing a mouth filled with far too many teeth for their jaws to ever close comfortably, all while they stood stock still in the center of the room, staring emptily towards the entrance and into Bob's soul. As the plumber sprinted back to his home, screaming for his wife to call 911, the flesh animal remained still, until at long last the male scream died out and the abomination twitched.
Ugh.
And that's it.
I hate the twitch. That got me more than any other part of that story. Was the twitch. Ugh! Just thinking that anything could possibly be alive after that is horrible.
Now,
So, like, what do you imagine happened to the kids? What was your thought with writing that? I imagine that they just got whisked away to Birthday Forever land.
probably.
I like that you wrote it in a way where like the smell was introduced before Oliver went to his birthday party so that there wasn't confusion that the other four people were a part of this amalgamation.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
spare our boy.
I always assumed her wanted to leave it open. Maybe the clown was a horrible thing. Maybe
Oh yeah.
the clown just killed the kid and killed the four kids and then gruesomely murdered the two of them. Maybe
Yeah.
they scooted them off to Never Never Land and lived young. You never know.
It seemed like the clown wanted to help because the clown actually threw a birthday party and was like, you know what? Fuck your parents. I don't know. I really like the touch of the cotton candy like hair too. Something about that was really cool. I don't think I've ever heard a clown described like that, but it just made sense.
I like to think of whenever you describe or write about something, it should embody all of the things that are associated with it. You know, a clown has the circus, and the circus has, you know,
Balloon
uh,
pants.
balloon pants, cotton candy, bright colors.
Fucking
You know.
stilts. Oh god. You did say the clown was very tall though. I like the detail of the puffy gloves as well. Also, your story really made me want frozen pizza, and I don't think I've craved frozen pizza in a very long time.
It's not something you crave very often.
Not really. It's kind of just a nostalgia thing. The off-brand soda like Shasta, or didn't you say Mr. Pibb?
Yeah, Mr.
But
Pibb.
not Dr. Pepper.
That was Oliver's choice.
Ooh, Pibb is good.